Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Newell with MSO News Sports, joined by two of the top Salem News reporters, Dustin Luca and Paul Layton. Gentlemen, welcome, and welcome to the newsroom. You're the newsroom, really, but welcome to this feature that we're doing with reporters around the North Shore, Dustin and Paul. Thanks so much for joining us. And Dustin, let's begin with you and elections, because it was a big day in elections this past Tuesday for the city of Salem. You cover a lot of Salem news and have for a number of years. And I know the headline was, I think seeking higher office. And that's what Mayor Driscoll is obviously doing, winning that Democratic lieutenant governor's nomination. And Paul Tucker, I guess you would call it a promotion, seeking the Essex County District Attorney office, winning that race. But Dustin, you start us off and set us up. And what can you share with us about election night and election results this week?
Yeah. So obviously there was, Salem had a lot going on with the elections this time around. And I feel like if you actually looked at the ballots going from community to community, there was a lot of Salem people that were actually on the ballot in the Salem elections. Obviously, you had Mayor Kim Driscoll running for lieutenant governor, and everybody was focusing on that. She ultimately won that one. And then you also had Paul Tucker, who edged one out at the last second there for DA to go on to get the Democratic nomination for November. Another one that's really big in Salem actually is the state rep race, which is actually currently filled by Paul Tucker. And the winner of that was this kind of young guy who's on the school committee named Manny Cruz. He's 30 years old, just graduated from Salem High School in 2010, went to Salem State, went to Northeastern, and now he's kind of got this kind of a success story where, going through high school, he almost kind of fell through the cracks, and then had a number of programs kind of get him back on a path to ultimately get, awesome degrees and now become a state representative. So the thing that's causing this to be an issue in Salem is that the fact that Driscoll and Cruz both won now actually creates two holes on the school committee, which is kind of a big issue because they just extended the contract of the superintendent, and the school committee is now losing its only voice of color, basically, that represents the fact that I think the high school just recently became a majority minority school. So it's now you're kind of, the district is focusing for the first, not for the first time, but kind of really ramping up their focus on making sure that the students are represented in the same way, that there's as many, teachers of color and administrators of color and things like that as there are students of color. And now that there's the possibility that the only person of color on the school committee is, now become state representative, is kind of creating an interesting challenge. So one of the things that we're looking at and the city of Salem is kind of grappling with is what happens in January if Kim Driscoll goes on to win with Laura Healy, and also if Manny Cruz goes on and cannot serve in the school committee, because then all of a sudden you're dealing with two massive vacancies there. And it's also worth noting, Kim, if she wins, then leaves Salem as mayor, and Salem's had the same mayor for the last 17 years. So that's going to be a conversation, and those are all conversations that aren't really happening right now because the city's also diving headfirst into Halloween. Just to put it in a nutshell.
Well, let's go to Halloween in a minute, but
yeah.
Let me ask you this, Dustin. Were people surprised at the percentage of vote that Kim Driscoll got statewide now? Because, I mean, granted, a mayor is not a small job, but it's a regional kind of thing. And what she finally ended up with, about, she was at 47% a lot through the night, or later on, but that's a good percentage with a three-way race. And and plus when you're watching TV in the last week, you'd see one Kim Driscoll ad and then one hit Kim Driscoll ad, a negative Kim Driscoll ad run against her, which no one else had that I know of. But I thought, I'm not surprised she won, but I am surprised by the margin that she won at.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, Kim tends to be a bit of a lightning rod locally, as you can imagine. And, she has a lot of support in Salem. She has also a lot of opposition in Salem. And just as, there are a lot of people that are basically saying, all right, 17 years, there are a lot of people that are also saying 17 years is too long. So I wasn't surprised to see that Kim was really the only person getting attack ads. And a lot of it was focusing on kind of the success of the city. And one of the things that was interesting was that Kim kind of saw the result of the race and the margin that she received as kind of, not to say a referendum of how Salem has done, but kind of an endorsement of how Salem has done, because she ran statewide and then competed and won statewide. And a lot of it had to do with how things have gone back in Salem for the last 17 years.
Paul, do you want to react to any election stuff at all? Share with us. I know you didn't do a lot of election stuff, but you were on the Senator Joan Lovely race.
Right. Senator Lovely, who is the incumbent representing Salem, Beverly, Danvers, and Peabody in the state Senate. And she won fairly easily in the Democratic primary. Young man named Kyle Davis, who had never run for political office before, from Danvers, ran against her, but Lovely won that one, as you might expect, fairly easily. But no, I think the Driscoll story and what's happening in Salem, like Dustin said, is the most important development that's going on in terms of the elections locally. And I just think in Driscoll, just from observing over the years, that she's been talked about for years as a possible statewide candidate, maybe even for governor. I mean, this was years ago, and then it sort of died down. So I think she had a little bit of, I don't know if you would call it name recognition, but people have been aware of Kim Driscoll for quite a while. Salem, as Dustin knows, has a lot going on, is a well-known city in Massachusetts, and I think that sort of elevated her in terms of, being a mayor in Massachusetts. And one thing I noticed, just being on the mailing list for her daily schedule, is how much work it is to run for statewide office. I mean, she was all over the state every day, Saturday mornings out in Western Massachusetts in a library, meeting with like a handful of members from the city's, Democratic committee, that type of thing, so there's really a lot of work. And I know Dustin is looking at, and people have talked about how difficult is it going to be going forward for the next, 6 to 7 weeks for Driscoll to balance the job of the mayor and being a statewide candidate for lieutenant governor. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Dustin, I want you to react to the DA race that was between James O'Shea and Paul Tucker. Now, Tucker, the state rep who you were talking about, is currently the state rep in the Essex 7th district. But that campaign, I was watching the results, where I was trying to find them online on election night, and they seem to be coming in very slow for that race. I mean, you were probably watching it too, or maybe you were getting some other numbers, but I was amazed how slow they came in, and it was very close until kind of after midnight. I kind of woke back up in the middle of the night, checked my iPad or whatever, and then Paul Tucker built that lead up to a pretty, a comfortable win for him. But yet that was a race that was much closer than a lot of people thought it was going to be 2 months ago, for sure.
Yeah, and you would have, I know that was very surprising because, Tucker has, Paul's built a legacy around the North Shore, especially, where he rose up in the ranks of the police department in Salem and then became the state rep. It was interesting watching kind of those results come in and seeing Kim Driscoll celebrate, but then Paul Tucker not, because they were actually both celebrating in the same building. Where they were at Rockefeller's, where Kim Driscoll had taken out Colonial Hall, and then Tucker was downstairs in the basement, kind of like going, okay, where's the announcement? And I remember waking up Wednesday morning, kind of getting over that election hangover where reporters are just so, exhausted Wednesday morning from being up so late on Tuesday, going, hey, do we know anything yet on Paul Tucker? And it's like, oh no, nobody's declared yet. We're still waiting for it. And I'm like, the poor guy, because it's like, everybody else, it's like Manny Cruz was able to celebrate, Kim was able to celebrate. You see the photos with the balloons and things like that, and then Paul is just dragged out so much. Ultimately, he was able to pull it out, and I was able to talk to him a little bit earlier today, and he was very thankful for the support, obviously, and is kind of going forward to the race in November. But it was also just, I mean, it was exhausting kind of watching how slowly that one moved.
Yeah. I want to hold Salem for a minute. We're going to jump back to Salem, Dustin, in just a moment. I'm going to jump over to Paul and do Beverly, touch on Beverly. Paul, you ran a story this week in the Salem News on Varian and some contamination. And maybe you can update our listeners on that. It was a pretty comprehensive story on the, actually, I think I've got it right here. I can hold up here for the folks here, but there we go. There you go. Yeah, take us away on that one. Yeah.
We can read it as we go here, maybe.
Yeah, maybe you just need to read that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
refresh my memory.
This is the kind of programming we're providing. Just read this story for me, Paul. Yeah, that you wrote.
No, I love seeing the print version of the newspaper, Bill. It's still around, so that's good. So this is a story that I've been writing about for the last couple of years, and so we call it. It's the former Varian Site named after the company that used to own this property. It's an industrial site in Beverly, right off of Route 128 near the new Whole Foods Plaza.
Oh, yeah.
There's been a contamination problem there for years. The company is literally under state oversight, has been trying to clean up the underground chemicals for 30 years, and it has not really been working. I did a story a couple of years ago that kind of brought it all back to light, and neighbors formed a group, and the local politicians are getting involved. The state took a closer look at it. And so the bottom line is the state, earlier this year, they ordered Varian to come up with a new cleanup plan, and they gave them deadlines, and they said that they could be fined if they don't get this thing cleaned up. The worry is that these chemicals, toxic chemicals, could be getting into homes, nearby homes. So they go in the groundwater, downhill in the groundwater, and they can vaporize through your basement and get into the homes. The story I had today, there was a report Varian filed this week. They're required to file these reports on their efforts, and it had to do with their measures they're taking at this one particular house near Varian, where they've tested the indoor air and the levels are higher than they should be. Not enough that it's a quote unquote immediate danger or immediate risk, but they are higher than the thresholds the state sets for homes. So anyway, the bottom line is Varian said they're going to install this system of pipes and fans under the house to prevent these toxic chemicals from getting inside the house. So it's just emblematic of the big concern that the neighbors have. Like, you don't know, and again, this has been going on. The cleanup started in 1992. The toxic chemicals have been there since the 50s and 60s, when people used to dump this stuff in there's a stream, and they just used, back in the day. And so it's something that you can't see, you can't smell, and people are worried that it's inside their houses. And so it's a big story. And this was the latest development, this one particular house where they know that the chemicals are getting in the house, and the company needs to take measures to stop that.
Yeah. All right. Dustin, I'm going to bounce right back across that Salem Beverly Bridge that I never thought would ever be built years ago, Paul, when you and I used to hang out at football games, right?
Yeah.
Many, many years ago. But it was many years ago it was built. But Dustin, tell us about the Salem Halloween parking story. There's a plan, that's out there. Tell us about that to help alleviate some of the parking problems in Salem, possibly.
Yeah, so this is a really weird situation, because every single time the tourism seasons all kind of fire up, everybody starts complaining about parking, because all of a sudden everybody's driving to Salem when there's no place to park. So there's been something they've been trying to put through the city council this year, where it's got a long history to it. Basically, there's a number of private property owners around downtown that basically sell their space for parking every October. And you're actually not allowed to do that by the city's laws, but nobody actually enforces it, because the only person who can enforce it is kind of busy dealing with all the restaurants during Halloween. So they've created a process to make people get permits so that they can basically agree to city rules and say, okay, I will allow parking. It'll run from this hour to this hour. It'll have a staff person there. We'll make sure that it's shut down by 8 o'clock or whatever the time was. It's become really controversial, because by creating this process, the city is basically saying, bring your cars downtown and park here, when they've been trying for 20 years to actually say, don't bring your cars downtown. So it's kind of created this kind of a clash of the city's culture, where some people are basically saying, does this really fit with what matters to the city, or is this just kind of like a cash grab kind of thing? And the reason why it's coming up now is because it went before a city council committee, I think it was either last week or the week before, and actually got unanimous support. But because it's a zoning change, it requires 2/3 support, and it might actually not have that kind of support. There might be, I think I know of 3 councilors who are against it. If there's 4, then it dies. And I think that there might actually be 5. So there's going to be 2 city council meetings, one next week on the 15th, and then another one on the 22nd, where they're going to be talking about this issue. And it's either going to go up or it's going to go down. So,
As you're talking, Dustin, I'm thinking, how many actual parking spaces do residents really have in downtown Salem that they can sell? I mean, I'm sure I know there are some, but really, how many are there, you know?
Well, the property that seems to be behind the proposal is one of the funeral homes around Salem Common, and they have the number I keep hearing is somewhere around 70 or 80 spots.
Oh, okay.
It's sizable, and I know that it's that property that a lot of the neighbors have been fired up about, because then you're dealing with that many cars going in and out, because it's not just 60 or 70 cars over the course of a day. They're only staying for a few hours, so it's 60 or 70 times however many trips you're dealing with.
Okay. Okay, that's different. I'm thinking of, you know, somebody that might have a half of a driveway down
Well,
in very downtown. That's what I'm,
And that's
yeah,
the
okay.
thing, and I think that they're looking at 20 or 30 different properties that would actually apply to this thing. And a lot of them are,
Okay.
you know, like one of them is one of the churches. They raise money and then they give that money to the pantry and things like that. So that's part of the reason why the city's been like, we can't just shut all of them down, because there's actually some really, really good actors that are raising some really important dollars for some really important efforts.
All right, great information.
So that's where it becomes an issue of cultural identity.
When does that come before the council? That's got to be soon, I would think, huh?
Yeah,
I mean,
so it goes back from committee to the main body on Thursday, the 15th. And if it gets a passing vote, it'll need a second one on the 22nd in order to actually become law. But if it gets a rejection vote in either of those meetings, then it's gone. So,
okay.
So it could actually be one and done on the 15th.
I think I would still park as far away as I can before I walk down to, you know, that's just my plan, you know.
Or take the train or take the bus or
Exactly.
other things, Uber, Lyft.
Go at 10 in the morning. All right, now, Paul, let's just jump back across the bridge over to Beverly. I saw you also wrote a story recently on another apartment building on Rantoul Street, down in the lower Rantoul Cabot area that is on the proposal or on the docket to be built in Beverly. Is that possible?
Yes, no, it looks like it will be built. It does comply with zoning regulations. There's not much that the city could do to stop it if they were so inclined. But this is a proposal to build a 5-story building with 60 apartments on lower Cabot Rantoul, right where Cabot and Rantoul merge, down by Salem Beverly Bridge, right down by the waterfront. So it's really it's a key location. It's the gateway into Beverly when you're coming over the bridge from Salem. The developers, Beverly Crossing, who've done a lot of other work on Rantoul Street over the years, they sort of unveiled, the images for what it looked like, and it's going before various city boards. So this has been an ongoing issue in Beverly. It's been an ongoing issue in a lot of places. But there've been a lot of new apartment buildings, particularly on Rantoul Street around the train station in the last 10, 15 years, a lot of them by this same company, Beverly Crossing or its predecessor, Windover. And people do get upset about the traffic and the parking, in some cases about the demolition of, historic buildings. Other people say, we need more housing, all these statewide candidates that we've been talking about keep talking about how there's a housing crisis in Massachusetts. Rents and prices are sky high. So we need more places for people to live. These aren't necessarily the most affordable, places. That's the other side of it. So it's a difficult issue, and it really is a controversial one in Beverly. But like I said, in this particular case, and a lot of this comes down to zoning and the rules, which gets kind of complicated and can be kind of boring, when you're in these meetings. But that's what determines whether developers can do certain things. And in this case, they can build a 5-story apartment building. They're going to knock down, I think it's 4 or 5 buildings to make way for it. So in a year or two, you're going to see another big change by the waterfront. There's a new restaurant that's about to open down the waterfront too. That took about 30 years before that development went in. Speaking of the new Salem Beverly Bridge that went in 30 years ago, when that happened, they knocked down the old McDonald's building closed. Anyway, long story is that restaurant's about to open. So there's a lot of changes going on near the on the waterfront in Beverly.
Right, Rantoul Street is totally different now than it was 10 years ago. That's for sure. Yeah, with the new apartment buildings, and that McDonald's, I think that was like one of 2 McDonald's ever to close. I think wasn't that out there, Paul, years ago. There was one in Lynn, that closed in
Yeah.
downtown Lynn, and there's one, and that one closed, and probably now some others have closed, but that was one of the things that closed a long time ago. Yeah, that McDonald's. Yeah.
Yeah. It was one of the first in Massachusetts when it opened in the 1960s, but yeah, when the new bridge came in, it became difficult to get in there for a fast food restaurant. The same, situation is going to apply to this restaurant, and it's a 350 seat restaurant. It's a big restaurant,
Yeah.
and people are concerned about traffic there too. You kind of have to come down from Salem and like spin around to get in there. There's not a lot of parking, same issue. Down by the waterfront, it's sort of a cramped area with a lot of different elements. So it'll be interesting to see. But a lot of people are also glad to finally see there's never been a restaurant on the waterfront in Beverly, and people say what a great waste of a resource. So this will be a first.
Another option from Bill and Bob's, I guess, right? There you go. Yeah. All right. Nothing wrong with Bill and Bob's. Okay.
Hey.
Nothing at all. Gentlemen, we'll stop here, but is there anything else you want to share with us? Anything looking ahead? Anything else you want to make note of? We covered a lot of stuff here in the newsroom this week.
If you're not registered to vote, register to vote.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. As we were saying, I think the fact, watching Kim Driscoll, the longtime mayor of Salem, seek a statewide office, the odds are that she's going to win. The Democrats are heavily favored, but I think that's the big story going forward, just to keep an eye on that campaign and what it means to the city of Salem too.
You got it. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Paul Layton, Dustin Luca of the Salem News, and I'm Bill Newell here on MSONewsports.com.